Welcome to the Bradford Literature Festival. My name is Saima Mir. I'm the author of The Khan, and I grew up in Bradford. I grew up in Heaton, and I went to school at St Joseph's College in Manningham quite a long time ago, where I studied for GCSEs, and then I did my A-levels, and after that I went to the University of Bradford, where I studied biomedical sciences. So I'm very, very familiar with the city. I'm familiar with the Waterstones in the middle, which I spent so much time at and I absolutely loved. And so when I graduated from university, I got married and I left. It didn't work out. And when I came back, I was a little bit lost about what to do. And I pestered the features editor at the Telegraph and Argus. I didn't really know how journalism worked. I didn't know anyone in journalism, but I just knew that I wanted to write. And they were looking for columnists for a thing called The Voice of Youth, where they wanted people to write about their favourite things about the city. So I wrote about Lister's Mill and how much I loved it. And it was when it was being refurbished and done up. And I sent them that. And then I emailed and called the features editor, whose name was Dave Barnett. And I said, I really want to get into journalism. I don't know what to do. Can you help me? And he was really lovely and really gracious. And he invited me over and he talked me through it. And he said, would you like to write some more? And I said, of course I would. So I regularly, or whenever things came up, I would write for them. And then eventually he called me one day and he said, there's a job. Would you like to apply? Now, I'd never, ever been in a newsroom before, but I just knew that this was absolutely what I wanted to do. So I went for this interview, which I completely blagged. I didn't know what I was doing, but I think my passion for the city and my passion to learn kind of shone through. So they said, you sound great. Why don't you spend 2 days in the newsroom? And the minute I walked into the newsroom, I felt like I'd come home. I felt as if I'd found the place that I absolutely belonged. And I loved it. I was so lucky. They gave me a traineeship, which meant that I was paid a salary. They also sent me to Journalism College in Darlington, where I did my qualifications. That was my NCTJ and my NCE. And I had the best time. It was just so wonderful to be in a city that I loved, doing something that I absolutely adored. And I got to develop my skills like that. So there were 3 places that I really wanted to work. One was the Telegraph and Argus, because my grandfather had taught me to read headlines from the newspapers. The Guardian, because that's what I used to read when I was doing my A-levels and I thought it was really cool, and the BBC. So what I did was I wanted to freelance for The Guardian. I thought, I really need to write for these people. How do I do that? And I figured out that the best way to do it was to be really gutsy, to be honest, but be gutsy. So what I did was I made my CV, which was all honest and accurate, but at the bottom I put awards. And I put that I was going to win an Oscar and I was going to win a Pulitzer Prize and I was going to win all these things. I future dated them. And then I got a call from their features editor to say, we'd love you to write for us. And that was that. So I wrote for them in between working full-time at the Telegraph and Argus. In the evenings, I would write for them. It was really fun to see my name, my byline in that paper, which was amazing. So I was at the Telegraph and Argus for about 3 years. And then after that, I really wanted to go to the BBC because I just wanted to be there. I felt like that was the place where I could kind of come into my own. So I used to apply for every BBC job that was going, even the ones that I was completely underqualified for. And then eventually I got an interview for a job for a video journalist. So I went for the interview and I got a call back saying, we really liked you. You're not quite qualified for the video journalist job, but we like you. We want to take you on. We want to nurture you. So I guess what I learned was you should always go for the things that you really, really want. And then eventually, if someone likes you, they will take you under their wing and nurture you. So I did that. And I worked in television. I worked on Look North with Krista Ackroyd and Harry Gratian, and Tanya Arnold. So all those great people who were so experienced. I learned about standing in front of a camera. I learned about editing. I learned about scripting for TV, which was completely different to scripting, to writing news for newspapers. And I also did some stuff in radio. So I was there for about 3.5 years. After that, I won an award from the Commonwealth Broadcast Association. I completely did not know what I was doing, but I knew that I wanted to work abroad and do some reporting abroad. So there's great opportunity where I pitched some ideas and I landed that award. And so then I spent 6 months reporting for stories from Pakistan, which is where my family was from. So I went there, I stayed in Karachi, I stayed in Sindh, in a village there, and I wrote some stuff for The Times and for The Guardian, and I pitched some stuff to Al Jazeera. So that was kind of where I was with journalism, and I wanted to go freelance after that. So I quit the BBC and I continued writing things freelance, but my heart then was in fiction, because I sort of felt like people were losing interest in stories. We didn't always want to be told genuinely what was going on. Sometimes there's things that fiction does, where it whispers to you and it changes you. And I wanted to tell stories about people like me, because when I was growing up, I never found girls or women who looked like me in the books that I wanted to read. And I spent hours in the Waterstones and in a shop called Shared Earth, which was just behind the Arndale Mall, where I used to buy lots of books by Malcolm X and Maya Angelou, but there was never anyone who was like me. And living in Bradford and working, covering crime stories, I'd heard some amazing urban myths. They were just brilliant. So I thought, I've got to write about these things. I've got to write about the kind of women I know, the kind of girls I know, who aren't being rescued, because they don't need rescuing, because we rescue ourselves, right? So I wrote The Khan. So The Khan is the story of Jia Khan, who is the reluctant daughter of a criminal kingpin. She's a very smart, clever woman who grows up in this fictional city, which are kind of based on Bradford, because that's the place I loved. And it's about what happens to her when her father dies and her brother is kidnapped, and she's dragged back into the underworld, and how she navigates the world of being from two different cultures and being Muslim in a world where people don't understand that, and being a smart, strong, clever woman in a world where women aren't always respected for being that. So I wrote this book and I couldn't sell it. I had a great agent who just couldn't do anything with it because the landscape wasn't ready for it back then, I think. But in the meantime, what happened is that lots of men started writing, lots of Asian men from the north started writing crime fiction, and that got picked up. So that sort of nudged things along a bit. A really great book was written called The Good Immigrant, which was edited by somebody called Nikesh Shukla. And he changed the landscape and he set up an agency. And my book was still sat there and I just couldn't do anything with it. And then things kind of changed and I had a baby and I left my agent because I thought this book is never going to sell. And then Nikesh Shukla set up his agency and took me on. And that was the moment where everything changed, and suddenly there was an interest in this book about women, because suddenly people knew that there were stories that were not being told, and actually there was an audience for. And then George Floyd was killed, and there were riots across America, and books like Bernardine Evaristo's Girl, Woman, Other was suddenly at the top of the Times bestseller. And bookshops knew that books by diverse audiences were interesting and that they would sell and people wanted to buy them. And they started demanding those books from publishers. And the Khan sort of came into its own. So when it came out, Waterstones did a special blood-splattered edition. And the book got optioned by BBC Studios for television. And it's now out in hardback, and we're sort of seeing what people think of it. And I think a lot of women are really enjoying reading about someone who's like them in the pages of a book. I'm going to now read a section from The Khan, which was one of my favourite pieces to write. It is the section where Jia Khan goes to meet the Jirga, who are the group of men who ran the city with her father. So her father has been killed and her brother is missing. Jia wondered what her father would have to say about the situation in which she now found herself. She had considered his dispensation of justice to be ugly and misguided, feeding only his ego and having no place in the betterment of society. She had argued endlessly with him over this man's value and that man's virtue, but nothing had ever been resolved. And today, these dangerous men, these men whose reign she had long wished to see end, stood before her, awaiting her guidance and instruction. She reminded herself of Binyamin and steeled herself for the onslaught. Janan Khan spoke first. He was the eldest of the men. His tone was cold, his manner frosty, yet he began with kind words to her. "I would like to offer my condolences to you. Your father was a true Pathan and a king among our people. We will miss him and pray you find peace." A wry smile spread across his face and he bared his teeth. "You are many things, Jia Khan, but you are not our Khan. You are a woman," he said. "I am here to listen to my father's people," she responded. Silence fell across the room, followed by a sound from deep within Janan Khan's belly. He was laughing at her. He turned to his comrades, smirking, and they joined him. Their half-suppressed scorn awoke an old hatred in Jia, one that she had not felt in some time. Anchoring herself with a reminder of who Janan Khan was, she refused to take the bait. His ways were the old ways, his sensibilities the old sensibilities. His green eyes had greyed, watching time and people change, but his archaic interpretation of honour and loyalty had not, and he believed that women should know their place. Jia knew hers, and it was not at the feet of these men. She raised her hand to silence them the way she had seen her father do many times. She was on course to become a judge under British law, so she knew how to control a room. Maybe that is why they stopped laughing. On the other hand, this was not that world, and this was a world in which her worth remained unproven. She waited, allowing the silence in the room to grow until it became unbearable, and Janan Khan exploded. "She will lead us into destruction. Look at her, so frightened that she dare not even speak." His anger infected his comrades, and their voices rose like a rabble. Bazid Khan tried to silence them again, but Janan would have none of it. The two men's voices became louder and louder, with others at the table trying to outshout each other. Harsh words were exchanged in English and Pashto, accusations flung, and age-old wounds torn open. Jia listened, their words watering the anger within her, and she blamed her father. Was this his badal for her, to let her walk in his shoes? The rage that had taken root when she'd heard what had happened to Binyamin wrapped around her sinews like ivy. She straightened up, her head being pulled by an invisible string that hung from the rafters. She looked at the old men who had built the family empire alongside her father, the men who owned the city and intimidated its inhabitants. She watched them spit and seethe and goad each other, unable to control their tongues and their tempers, and a calm came over her. She was better than this. She was smarter than them, and she had nothing to prove. So I'm going to set you a creative challenge based on something I did for myself a very long time ago, and that actually has been proven to work. So I wrote myself a letter from the future saying who I was now, what I was doing, and what kind of awards I'd won, and what I did for a living. And I would like you to do that for yourself. So write a letter from yourself 10 years in the future to now, saying who you are, where you live, what you do for a living, what you studied, all the things that you love, anything that you can think of that you would like for yourself. Write it to yourself as if it is happening now, and then fold it, put it in an envelope and date it and keep it somewhere safe. Thank you so much for listening to me today. I hope I've inspired you, and I hope that the challenge really sets you on the path to achieving your dreams and your goals. Thank you.